It's the Worth Knowing live stream, and we're on the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube, my very own Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, and indeed, the fact that we're on so many platforms is in a very meta way what I want to talk about today, because the last few weeks have really reanimated the conversation about the role of news media and the slow strangulation of news media, whether by market forces or their own hand or a combination of both. The news business has always been an odd chimera, a hybrid of two very different animals. It's right there in the words I just used. News business. News, journalism, is part of the architecture of the American Republic. It's a function that's literally built into the operating system of the United States in our Constitution, in the First Amendment. Thomas Jefferson famously said that he would prefer newspapers without a government to a government without newspapers. You can't have a democracy based on group decision-making unless people know what they're making decisions about. Otherwise, they might as well just pull voting levers at random, which honestly, right now, would probably yield better results than what we have. So the idea of news in the American context takes on almost scriptural importance. But then there's the other half of the phrase, business. It's an oxymoronic pairing with the lofty ideals of journalism, and it goes just as far back to the birth of the Republic. News media, such as it was in the late 1700s and early 1800s, was partisan, sensationalistic, and vicious. A man named John Fenno founded what was arguably the first national partisan newspaper in 1789 called the Gazette of the United States. And yeah, he could have taken Justin Timberlake's advice from the movie The Social Network and just called it U.S. Gazette. It's cleaner. But it was essentially a semi-official mouthpiece for George Washington's administration. Thomas Jefferson decided to respond in kind by supporting a rival publication called the National Gazette in 1791, and both papers were filled with scathing attacks and accusing opponents of tyranny and sedition and corruption. But that's where the business side of the news business began to evolve and shape journalism. By the 1820s, a new business model called the penny press arose that tried to appeal to a broader mass audience. And look, it wasn't necessarily better. These newspapers, like the New York Sun, founded in 1833, focused on crime and human interest stories, but they were less overtly partisan. And the evolution, of course, continued in the ensuing decades, driven by what could sell. And eventually, as technology developed, the market competition moved into radio and television. The point is, despite the almost religious reverence that the framers of the Constitution had for the role of news media, a nonpartisan news media that puts the truth first and truly aims to inform citizens in a republic has never been the reality. Even the recent story about the capitulation to Donald Trump over the Kamala News interview on 60 Minutes is just an echo of an earlier incident from 30 years ago about a spiked tobacco industry story that got pulled for fear that it would mess up a different corporate merger at the time with Westinghouse. They even made a terrific movie about it called The Insider. I hope you've seen it. But at the same time, even acknowledging that partisan media is nothing new, sensational media is nothing new, market forces changing what works and what doesn't in the media is nothing new, there's no denying that what we're seeing is another major turn of the crank right now, because we not only have a rapid evolution in technology changing the media marketplace, the business side, we also have a petty tyrant in the White House who's called the press the enemy of the people, and who has no shame or hesitation whatsoever in using the full force of the United States government to hammer the business side of the news and make them bow to him. So this leads to a ton of questions. Can the more lofty aims of journalism survive these combined forces? How can individual voters and news consumers navigate what's becoming a media minefield? And maybe most important, is there perhaps some silver lining, some light at the end of the tunnel here? Are we going through a period of creative destruction where there's an opportunity for media to innovate and thrive and get better? Now, anytime I think about the current state and the future of media, my very first speed dial or speed email is Mark Jacob of the Substack Stop the Presses, a weekly newsletter about right-wing extremism and how it's exploited the weaknesses in American journalism and what we can do about it. He's the former editor at both the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, a multi-time guest here on the show. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks for asking me.
It's always a pleasure to have you, and it's both depressing and enlightening and maybe a little hope-inspiring. That's where I'm hoping to go today, is to cover all of those bases. And I want to start off where you start off in your most recent edition of Stop the Presses. I hope people will subscribe to that, and we'll get to a bunch of questions here that I teased on Substack notes earlier, like, why did you cancel the Washington Post but not the New York Times? And is there indeed light at the end of the tunnel? We'll get to all of those. And by the way, for folks who are in the chat, if you have questions for Mark about media, the current media experience and the future of media, pop them in the chat. We'll try and get to them. Thinking of the history I just ran through and your own vast experience, are we at a fundamentally different place in terms of having functional, independent, and truth-telling media today than we've been at in living memory?
This is the most dangerous time for American media ever, in my opinion. You have a fascist president. I mean, he really is. I mean, he wants an autocratic president, wants to control everything, and he wants to control the news media. I mean, it's that simple. And I mean, unfortunately simple, that he doesn't have a nuanced view of what the role of journalism is in a free country. And so it's constant intimidation. It's constantly leveraging, the powers of the federal government. Him abusing the Federal Communications Commission to strong arm and extort, in effect, the news networks. And no, it is really a five-alarm fire. It's an alarming time for us, and we need to face up to that instead of acting like it's just politics or just old hat.
In terms of how to respond to it, how to filter it, how to deal with this new media landscape, you have some practical suggestions, kind of a three-part test that you apply in your most recent edition of Stop the Presses. I want to start off with one of the first planks of that test. One of the things you wrote, you said, it's important to be suspicious of corporate media whose top priority is making money, not speaking truth to power. Two legacy outfits, ABC News and CBS News, are paying millions of dollars in protection money to stay out of Trump's crosshairs. What else will they do to appease him? CBS parent Paramount denied that its decision to cancel Stephen Colbert's top-rated late-night talk show was related to the show's anti-MAGA content, but excuse me if I disbelieve that. Now, I have my own theory that I'm itching to get to. Of the case here, of why I don't buy their bullshit story here. But let's get to your theory of the case first, at the risk of discovering that yours is a hell of a lot better than mine, because it probably is. Why you disbelieve them?
Well, I don't know, and they claim it was purely financial reasons, but that explanation makes no sense to me. He's the top-rated person in that time slot. If they wanted to save money on the production costs, they could do that. And do they really need a live band on that show? I don't think so. That's just kind of a holdover from, traditional way that kind of show was done. I have seen no evidence that they tried to cut costs. I just don't think that that's what's going on. These are money people. These are people who are in it to make money. I don't think that they're in it, just to entertain people in their living rooms. They want to make money off of it. And why would they operate this show for this long if it was a big loser? Another thing, Matt, that when they say that, well, it's lost money, well, there are a lot of ways that a show like that benefits the network. I mean, that it makes people watch at least the end of these local affiliates news shows that lead into Colbert, which is a huge benefit to these local affiliates, many of which are owned by the networks. So are they counting that in the costs or in the benefits? I don't think so. And when you just look at it, and I don't know that it was part of the deal in which CBS capitulated their parent company, Paramount, but because frankly, a lawyer friend of mine has explained it to me that if you have a lawsuit settlement, as they did, all parts of it are supposed to be written down in the settlement. So did they do a side deal to fire Colbert? I don't know, but they couldn't have done it officially, or it would have been kind of a violation of court ethics. At the same time, they're selling, or they're merging with Skydance, and that's owned by the Ellison family, which they're Trump supporters. So was there this kind of gentleman's agreement or handshake thing where why don't you go ahead and fire Colbert so we don't have to because we want to, and so it just kind of stinks, this idea that, well, we just did it for financial reasons. No way. There's just no way. It just doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, before we get to my theory of the case, which does match up, at least in spirit, with yours, just to build on your point about the Ellison family, Nepo baby David Ellison, the incoming CEO of the Skydance Paramount conglomerate monster behemoth, He has now sent letters to the FCC committing to, quote, the appointment of an ombudsman to ensure that there is no bias in their news and the elimination of the media giants' diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Now, look, I could give two shits about the elimination of their DEI initiatives. Their DEI initiatives were probably bullshit in the first place. So if they do away with them as a way to throw a bone to the Trump administration, whoop-de-doo. But what do you make of this? I mean, this is another plank in your case for why this is all, complete cockamamie, what, their whole alibi that like, oh yeah, it was just business. I mean, they're saying, well, we're gonna put in an ombudsman. Do they need an ombudsman to eliminate bias in their news division?
No, I don't think they do. I mean, they have professional journalists who do that. And again, when you talk about bias, it depends what you're talking about. I mean, all news organizations have values. They don't cover every story that comes in front of them. They just pick and choose what they think will benefit them and their owners, and their customers, and their the public. So I mean, it's so this idea that anyone is really objective is just a myth. I mean, every news organization has values. When I was Metro editor at the Chicago Tribune, I didn't cover every story that was happening in the city that day. I picked out 8 or 10 of them and made sure the reporters covered them. And so please, that's a silly notion. The thing about it, Matt, is that this idea of appointing some sort of monitor to sit in and make sure that CBS News isn't being biased sounds so much like the political officer that the Soviet Union used to put in all organizations. There'd be this outsider who they would be stuck into any kind of business or organization, who would just sit there and listen and would report who was doing the not nice things. I mean, it's nefarious. It's downright Soviet, and it's just authoritarian. It's just this big brother kind of creepy stuff. That's not the way news organizations ought to be run. And anyone who's going to agree to like appoint some sort of monitor to make, to spy on all the journalists, it doesn't give a crap about journalism.
I completely agree. And if you ever read The Hunt for Red October or see the movie, there's a great depiction of that Soviet era practice of having a party official
Right.
there to be the thought police for what everyone says. I no more to say about that. I do want to address Amethyst Peony's point. I mean, look, I see what you're saying. Like, it is easy for a white guy to say that about DEI initiatives. I'm just saying that I have zero faith in Paramount's the efficacy of Paramount's DEI initiative. I don't believe that they had something that was particularly effective, and therefore I don't believe that it's much of a loss for it to go away. But I hear your point.
Could I say something about that?
Please,
I feel
please.
like I think it's really important to be diverse and inclusive. Really important, because especially in the news business, because if and I come from the Chicago Tribune was completely was a white newspaper for very long and had no clue what was happening in the Black community in Chicago. And that the reason they had no clue what was happening in the Black community in Chicago is because they had no Black reporters. And so it made them a bad news organization in that way. They were not covering their community. And it's just good business. It's fairness also, but it's just good business in the journalism industry to make sure that your staff is diverse. And I do think the thing about DEI policy, the more people say what they're going to do, the more they actually do it. And for that reason, I do see some value in people stating their values, stating how they are in favor of diversity and inclusion. I do take your point, though, that there was some of that was lip service in the past.
Right. It sounds like performative corporate,
Right.
whitewashing is not the right term, but like performative wokeness rather than like an actual meaningful initiative. But look, one of the things about people who have a liberal mindset, not necessarily political liberals, but believe in political liberalism, is I am wide open for evidence that I'm wrong. I could be just dead wrong about that. So here's something that I could also be dead wrong about. I want to make my case for why I think the Colbert cancellation cover story that It's all just business. This is a money-losing enterprise. I think it's bullshit. And I want to lay this out because I want to go somewhere with it later. I want to make the case that maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe there is a silver lining coming here. But this is why I don't buy Paramount's cover story on Colbert here. Joe Rogan got a Spotify deal for his podcast last year worth $250 million. Now, that's up from his previous deal, which was worth $100 million. Now, he claims, this is the only source or provenance to these numbers that I could find, but it doesn't seem wildly inflated. He claims to get 11 million listeners per episode. Now, Conan O'Brien, another late night comic, not nearly as successful as Stephen Colbert, has a $150 million deal for his media company, the star of which is his own podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And a few years ago, the most reliable numbers I could get on that, 1 million downloads per episode. Let's look at the top earning YouTubers in 2025. Mr. Beast, $82 million a year. Jake Paul, $34 million a year. Mark Fishback, $30 million. Rhett and Link, $35 million. Now, Stephen Colbert gets 2.4 million views per episode. They claim that they pay him $20 million a year, and they claim that the show costs $100 million per year to make, although there's a lot of fuzzy corporate accounting math in that. The point is that Paramount is operating a streaming service that is struggling. The business news on Paramount's streaming, on Paramount Plus, is that they're starting to turn it around. In the first quarter of 2025, their losses were reduced to $109 million. That is pop a cork news in the business world. You only lost $109 million in the first quarter. That's a 62% year-over-year decrease. So you're losing $100 million a year on your streamer. And you, Paramount executives, have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. That's what corporate executives, that's their responsibility. You owe shareholders maximize their value. So you have one of the most popular comedians on planet Earth working for your company right now. You have other personalities of similar or lower profile who are making more than you're paying Colbert. And all of the executives who are also making millions of dollars a year are totally flummoxed by the question of, is there some way we could make money off of this guy? I mean, I'll just close out by saying, make no mistake that if Stephen Colbert so chooses, once he leaves his show, he's going to make tens of millions of dollars a year on Spotify or YouTube or some streaming service. And somehow the Paramount executives are saying, no, we're good. We don't want a piece of that. We don't like money. That's not what we do here. We're here to lose $109 million a quarter and call it great news on our streaming service. We can't find any way to monetize Stephen Colbert.
Right.
So no politics here. Mark Jacob, with your vastly greater experience in media, what do you make of my case?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it kind of meshes with my point, which is that they didn't seem to want to, if they really had a financial problem, they didn't seem to want to correct it. There was no attempt to pivot in any way. It was just pull the plug. And so that's why it doesn't pass the smell test, because what you're pointing out is that the whole landscape for kind of video entertainment is changing rapidly in this country. And, with streaming and everything else, and, people fleeing cable and fleeing appointment TV even. And so it was up to them to adjust to that with a proven talent. The one thing the one thing you can't duplicate is a personality on TV that people like to listen to and watch. I mean, and that's the gold in that. And so rather than like change the format of the show or change how the show, when it's presented and over what platforms, they didn't do any of that stuff. Instead, they just said, the thing that's most valuable that we have, we're just going to dump for no reason with no negotiation. And it just doesn't pass any kind of smell test for anyone who's paid any attention to the media industry at all. It's just a lie. It's just a lie. They dumped him if it's for financial reasons, it's for the financial reason that they want to suck up to Donald Trump so that he doesn't sabotage their business.
I couldn't have said it better. And I mean, this runs right into what we're seeing in the chats here. Cynthia Rice's question, who watches, sorry, this is like Ohio State University, the Cynthia Rice, because there may be others. Who watches these YouTubers? Bots? Well, I'll tell you one type of person who watches these YouTubers, because it is a good question. Like some of this seems like, what the hell?
Right.
Well, Amethyst Peony's got it. My youngest son watches Mr. Beast. My kids have been pleading with me for years to be allowed to watch Mr. Beast. I do not understand the attraction, but there it is. Amethyst Peony, you are spot on. That is right. Young boys, young men, magats. Yeah, I mean, but they're doing huge business. And, Joe Rogan, I mean, you can just see the numbers on YouTube. His big episodes, his Musk episode, his Trump episode, 69 million views. Like the numbers are on there. And yes, there's probably some bot inflation in there. But I was going to go back to your article for a few minutes, and I was going to talk a little bit, about like your other tests. I want to get to your interesting proposition of you chose to cancel Washington Post, but not New York Times. And I wanted to probe why. But since we're going here in the chats, I would love, let's bring in the part of the answer to this question, because I think we're kind of on this thread right now. Who's watching this? Well, we have some fresh polling out from our friends at Navigator Research. I've had their pollsters on my pod many times before. They're a great outfit, Democratic Party kind of aligned, but very reliable numbers. Let's just take a look at their graph. This is, like I said, hot out this morning on the 29th. This is Gen Z and their news consumption habits. So the first thing, there's a lot going on these charts. So I'll just very quickly summarize, especially for the people who choose to consume this kind of thing audio only. What these charts are saying, the headline here, is that Gen Z, young media consumers, are passive news consumers. They don't seek news out. They kind of have it flow over them in the course of consuming social media. And that's largely what their media diet is made up of. They're kind of scrolling around on YouTube. They're on social media. They're on online news. Very little live TV. Right at the very bottom in this chart on the right, you've got, their intake sources here. And you've got local newspapers, 8%, MSNBC, 8%, national newspapers, 13%. I mean, just absolutely crushed by the major sources of news intake, which is social media websites, online news websites, social media creators and influencers. And then on the left is just, they're being fed literally in their feed news in kind of a passive intake kind of way. So I just wanted to share that by way of saying, this is how the younger generation is taking in their news. Like these are the people who are watching these things, and they're kind of picking things up a little bit sometimes. And so let me put this to you. I suggested that the Stephen Colbert cancellation, in addition to being knuckling under to Donald Trump for political purposes, was also a failure of imagination on the part of corporate executives. It's the failure to see that there are hundreds of millions, billions of dollars out there being spent in ad revenue that's flowing to YouTubers, podcasters, and you have media talents, and you can't find a way to merge your news business in with the way that the younger generations are coming across news and consuming news. Is that what's going on here? Is there a failure of imagination going on inside these media companies?
Oh, big time. I mean, they're very risk averse, most of them, in this period of time where, what was it like 25 years ago, nobody was, nobody had a smartphone and nobody was, doing online news. Now, everyone is. And uh, I feel like that legacy media got caught kicking and screaming their way into modern, life. And it just a huge mistake. And I think that's, this idea that I'm not at all for let's blame the young people for not like, reading the op-ed page of the New York Times and stuff like that. That's crap. I don't believe in that at all. In fact, I think the consumer, rules. And so it really was up to legacy media to adjust to their audience, and they just failed to. And so they lost that audience I mean, it's sad for two reasons. It's sad for these big old companies who have a lot of employees and are losing money, but it's also sad for democracy in the way that sometimes the new ways of delivering news aren't that great and aren't that accurate. Plus, you have all these bad actors in here who are purposely trying to lie to people on these new platforms, and therefore the kind of old trusted triple check journalism doesn't get through to them. But I frankly think that I've had this discussion before. My newsletter is through Courier, and I talked to them about that. And one of the people at Courier used the phrase "low information voters," and I stopped her and I said that's a terrible way to describe it. I mean, that's disrespectful of the audience. Much better to call them underreached people who are underreached by traditional media, because it's the fault of the media. It's not the fault of the people. I mean, it's, they're going to do what they're going to do. And so it's not, they're low information because you didn't get your information to them because the information wasn't appealing enough. So let's put the blame where it actually belongs.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to respond to, one point that was coming in the chats here was, well, and I'll put this up, and thank you to Intune, who apparently made a donation. So this goes right. It's going to drag us back to your article, Mark, about what's worth paying for. But the comment here is, Mom Donnie Wynn shows that younger folk are getting the news. And I would just say, yes, but one of the most heralded things about his campaign is that he's communicating through TikTok videos, right? Short form video. Well, I'm going to go ahead and transparently admit to everyone watching and listening right now, when I went on my little screed, I didn't have those numbers memorized, obviously, about who had made what. I did a little prep. I mean, I always do research before my shows. I prep a little bit of what I want to say. I also think very carefully about, are there going to be a couple of minutes where I'm going to just say something that's a little bit pre-prepared? Why? Because the majority of consumption, just behind the curtain, the majority of consumption of this show, this is a live streamed show. We typically get on each of the platforms that we're on. So we're on YouTube, for example, on the Cliff's Edge channel. That's a channel that I helped Cliff Schechter to build over the course of the last couple of years, and where I regularly contribute. When we live stream this show, we get, 1,500, 2,500, 3,500 live on that one platform. We'll get several hundred on Substack. We'll get several hundred on Facebook. So, we'll get several thousand in the live stream, and then we'll rebroadcast. But I'd say the majority of the consumption of the content that we have here is, we have little clips. We have clips that are profile, that are going out on the platforms that are attuned toward that. And we have clips that are landscaped, that are more for YouTube. And if I have a 3 or 4 minute screed, we're putting it up as a video on YouTube. And that's, again, I'm trying to figure this out as I go. But there are people who are executives who are being paid millions of dollars a year to figure this out, and to figure out, if you were back at the Tribune or the Sun Times, okay, your core business model is print journalism. But I mean, you tell me, were people, even when you were, you haven't been there in a little while, were people trying to actively figure out, oh my gosh, how are we going to deal with this? How can we turn the stuff, the work that we have, the journalists that we have, how can we turn their work into a product that people will consume and pay for? Surely you must have had senior meetings about this.
Oh, yes. And but it was much of it was looking for magic bullets instead,
Mm.
like well, we're all going to pivot to video. Like we're going to make
Mm.
every one of our reporters do a video every day, just while they're out doing their reporting. And that the whole idea was they're going to do all the other work too, which was not realistic. That to just say, well, it's easy for them to do this additional task and with no diminishment of the previous job, which was just unrealistic. It's the way a lot of executives act. But I feel like they didn't want to develop the structure to be multi-platform in an effective way, and to really kind of translate great reporters' content into product that would work on a variety of channels. Because I mean, and I mean, really, I got to tell you, I left in 2018, and to the last dying day I was there, there were people who were print first. They were thinking print, and I was telling them, I was saying, we ought to just stop the printing. We should just stop ink on paper right now,
Wow.
because it's making us a little money now, but it's changing. It's killing our culture. It's forcing us to have a backward culture that is not innovative. We're letting the print side determine what we're doing online, which is insane. In 2018, that was insane, but that was happening. And so there was, I think there was a real problem with legacy media. Still is, you see, more video and more kind of imagination shown on New York Times website and places like that. So there's some sort of there's progress, but boy, I think that a lot of the people who were supposed to be masterminds in journalism got pantsed in the last couple of decades.
Pithily put. And I want to pick up on a chat that's going on in the chats. That was redundant. Between Kelly and Amethyst Peony, who are talking about, what form you want to take in, especially facts. It relates back to something you were raising earlier, Mark. And, this is an interesting point. It's an interesting point because how we source facts, how we get a hold and how we summarize facts. This is an area where, and I don't think there's a right answer here. There's an interesting exchange that you guys are having here in the chat, but it does relate a little bit to some more of that research from Navigator. And I want to pop this one up on the screen. This is again, the Gen Z, Gen A crowd. And for the people who are not actively watching this is qualitative focus group responses where people are doing their own research on major news topics. They're relying on AI, Reddit, or even comments to source facts. There's a comment in here. People are going to Reddit and they're seeing sort of the agglomeration of what lots of people are saying, and they're sort of using volume as a way to fact check.
That's a scary thing. And that's what the right wing's known that for a long time. And that's why they keep on repeating the same lies. And that's why they share their lies with other liars, and they all lie the same lie, because it's human nature really that the more you hear something, the more you think it might be true. And so that's the case. But that kind of news consumption does not work in an atmosphere in which people are on purpose sending disinformation your way, that they are lying to you on purpose repeatedly. And when they're doing that, then just deciding whatever you hear the most times is true is not going to put you in the right place.
Well, it's interesting. I just popped another slide from Navigator up here. This is another set of focus group responses. And I want to point to the one that on my screen anyway is in sort of this pale peach color. A New Jersey man who identifies as a weak Democrat says, I like to search a bunch of information really broadly, pick whatever is repeated. So then I know that information is true because it's repeated towards, I guess he means in all of the outlets. And look, I see what New Jersey man is saying there, that like, if you see it in a variety of news sources, maybe that adds some veracity to it. But This does lead to a question to you, which is you have these legacy. Actually, I'm going to put that back up here because you see another comment down at the very bottom here. I usually go back to my big three US ones, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And if I'm really uncertain, sometimes I'll go to BBC because they have some greater perspective on what's going on here in the States in terms of trying to do fact checking. So the point here from Navigator is younger Americans are using legacy brand name media sources, AP, the broadcast channels, the big newspapers, as okay, that's sort of the gold standard for fact checking. But it's not my primary source of information. It's
Right.
after I've gotten my AI slop summary and after I've seen what a bunch of Reddit people are saying, if I really need to figure out like, wait, is this BS or not, then I'll try to go to a New York Times or what have you. It just there is clearly still a brand value that people trust, that even young people, it's filtered down to this youngest generation. That seems like an asset that once again, the WAPOs and New York Times and APs of the world are not leveraging enough. They're sort of pissing away. They still enjoy a reputation as being a trustworthy arbiter of what is true, and they're not making use of it. I mean, what am I missing here?
No, it's funny. I used to always say this about newspapers I worked for, that they would never advertise themselves. They were selling advertising to other people, which meant that they were telling other people that advertising was valuable, yet they would never use the advertising to promote their own product, which was to me was either they didn't believe in the product they were selling, the advertising, or they were failing to use a product that they knew was valuable. So either way, it was stupid. And there's a lack of self-promotion. There's also a lack of, just in society in general, in when I think there ought to be a class in high school called, bullshit 101. It just should tell you, here's way people are going to lie to you. Here's what they say in, advertisements for soap. Here's what they say that would just like help you screen out the lies and distortions that are thrown at you in our society. And it make you a more skeptical person, and realize that all news sources aren't alike, and all assertions of fact aren't alike. I mean, it would say, all right, how many people were in this scientific study? How many people was it peer reviewed? Did this come, is the New York Times, when they say that this is happening, are they saying it's an anonymous source, or are they citing documents because the documents are going to be more reliable than the anonymous source. So just knowing the quality of sourcing is really important. And it's almost never explained to the civilian population. It's one of those things that journalists keep among themselves as a way to measure how much to believe something. But there's no reason they shouldn't be sharing that with the rest of the population.
All right, I want to give away what I think is $1 million idea, although I'm going to leave it up to the whole audience, everyone in the chats, to tell me. It's okay. You can be honest with me. If you think this is not a good idea, just tell me. Just say, Matt, no, not a good idea. I, for a long time, have wanted to do a show. I wanted to drop everything else I was doing and do a show. You remember old-timey game shows where they'd introduce the name of the show with the whole crowd saying it in unison? It's like Wheel of Fortune. Okay. I wanted to do a show where I'd get a whole crowd of people to give the title of the show at the beginning. That's bullshit. And every week I would go through some of the biggest news stories, and especially the talking points from our Republican friends, and we would just Snopes the hell out of them. Like Amethyst Peony was saying here, you stopped using Snopes after it insisted Project 2025 was not real. Good call, my friend. I would just go through and I'd show my sources and I'd explain why. I'd explain why I know what is true is true. And we would just deconstruct the massive spigot of bullshit flowing through our national discourse. Folks out in the chats, it's okay. You can tell me if that's not a great idea, but I think it's a great idea. Someone should do this. I should do it. Should I do this, Mark?
Yeah, it sounds good. Do it. But I mean,
right.
because there, I mean, Unfortunately, I think that a lot of legacy media, major media, have they've given up on fact checking, and they don't do it like they. This is a pet peeve of mine is that they will show Trump live on at some press conference. He'll talk for 45 minutes. He'll lie, twice a minute at least, and they will come back. They'll get out of that and they'll correct maybe one thing, and they'll leave everything else unchallenged. And if you add that up, that means that they are helping him lie. They are amplifying his lies. And
Yes.
and I feel like they shouldn't ever. I think I think a really responsible news outlet would make it a mission that it would never let a lie, a knowing obvious lie, pass through its product without being challenged. And I mean, that's their job, really. What's the job of journalists? It's to find out what's true and tell the public that,
Right.
and to make sure that the public is aware of things that are for their well-being and safety. That's the core job, is to warn people, and that's why the failure of the mainstream media to warn people about the rise of fascism and the possible coming of a dictatorship if we don't do something really damn fast, that their failure to warn on that subject is a basic negligence. It's a dereliction of duty.
First of all, I completely agree with everything you're saying, and I want to just commend people in the chats in the audience for coming up with some really stupendous ideas. Wheel of Bullshit may be my favorite so far. It definitely gives a strong visual to it. MJ, of course, has identified, as she usually does, such incisive comments week after week from MJ. The problem with my business model here, which is how long would the show be? And the problem is it would have been about 20 minutes a decade or two ago. Now it would be an all-day show. I would never stop. It would be a 24-hour telethon. I just, at least I would not lack for source material. I want to throw one more comment up here before we get to, I want to get back to your article I've been holding up. This is from our intern, Nicholas Olbetter. I think part of why people are checked out is because it takes more and more effort to fact check and figure out what's true. I'm going to actually text Nicholas. Nicholas, you're watching right now. I just emailed you the link. I want you to pop on for a second because I want to ask a genuine 19-year-old, I think you're 19, a question about all of this, like Gen Z. So go into your email and jump on. But this is there's actually a name for this. It's called Brandolini's Law. It's also known as the bullshit asymmetry principle, which is, let me just pop Nicholas's comment back up. You put your finger on something that is well identified in the internet, which is the amount of energy it takes to dispel bullshit is exponentially greater than the amount it takes to produce bullshit. And that is a huge problem. I still think that Wheel of Bullshit or That's Bullshit would be a show that would sell. Speaking of things that would sell, I'm going to drag us back for this portion of the discussion. I'm going to do something so meta here. You make another point in your article on Stop the Presses, which in your most recent edition out yesterday, you wrote, I want to quote you accurately and fully here. Oh man, where is it? Where is your second point? You made a point about what to pay for.
A second suggestion: ask yourself whether a news organization gives you something that nothing else does, something beyond commodity news based on press releases and news conferences. If you're paying for news, and you should pay for news, it's fair to expect unique insights or exclusives.
All right, here's what we're going to do, okay? This is so meta of me. While you give your explication of what you mean there, I'm going to pop your information for Stop the Presses right up here on the screen, and then I'm going to follow it with my information for the Worth Knowing Substack. And I would invite anyone who is out there who is not yet subscribed to either Mark or me to go ahead and do so. And if you feel so motivated to pay for your hardworking media members like us,
yeah, well, I'm free. I'm free, so you can try me, and if
you
hate me,
wow,
you can dump me. So it's
Mark, you are a cheap date, my friend.
I am,
so
and worth every penny.
So what do you mean? And what I specifically want to press you on is I'm identifying two things here. One is I see your point about pay for something that gives you a unique perspective, something
Right.
that's a value add, a
Right.
value proposition that you can't
Right.
get anywhere else. On the other hand, there's sort of a generic value in what AP, New York Times, WAPO bring to the table. Well, WAPO previously of, like, how do I know what is true? How do I know what I can trust?
Yeah.
And so there's something in that kind of generic old school legacy media that I'm also willing to pay for. And indeed, I still do when it comes to the New York Times. So tell me more about your advice for what media people should pay for.
Well, I do think that this trustworthiness is important. And, I used to, when I was Metro editor at Trib in Chicago, I used to tell people that, our product was not ink on paper. It wasn't, a web page. Those are not our products. Our product was credibility. Our product was, and that's why that's why we couldn't be wrong. We couldn't afford to be sloppy or wrong. We had to be super careful because that was our product, was credibility. And when you've lost that product, you're in big trouble.
I think that there is, I think the reason, actually, you know what? This is a great moment. This is a great moment to bring on our Gen Z avatar. I'm going to bring on Nicholas Olbetter just for a second because I'm going to make a proposition and I would like to ask an actual young person. This is a new segment that we're going to call Ask a Young Person.
Ask an actual young person.
Hello.
So Nicholas, when we welcome to the live stream, so we just put out a video on Worth Knowing where you introduced yourself and we said to everyone, hey, if you do a paid subscription to Worth Knowing, this is one of the things you're paying for, a young, bright college student who is doing good work and getting into politics and getting into media. One of the things you said in that video is that it's a myth that young people are disengaged, that they won't vote, they won't participate, they won't consume news. We just put up those stats that young people are passive news consumers. One of the things you said is, no, they will if it's authentic, if people really know where you're coming from. And Mark's point just now was that there is a sort of a disillusion of the brand value because people don't know where you're coming from. They don't trust you. How important do you think the authenticity factor is in why all of you young types are just sitting there TikToking it up and doing YouTube shorts constantly? Is that what's appealing about that, is kind of you feel that immediacy and you feel like you can trust the voices you're seeing?
I think that's definitely a part of it. A big part of social media is this sort of parasocial relationship that you form with the people that you're watching, and you're more likely to trust the people if you feel like you have a relationship with them. You can directly talk to them with like live chats like you have here, and social media in general is oftentimes a lot less high production, more genuine and just to camera. And that's another reason why it comes up as more authentic and people trust it more. And that's why more people, young people especially, are getting their news from social media sites online in general and less from these traditional news sources.
Do you one more question and then we'll get you out of here. When was the last time, besides working for me, that you spent a significant amount of time on a major brand name legacy news media site? New York Times, Washington Post.
I think most people's time on New York Times or whatever is just playing Connections or Wordle, and that's the extent of their knowledge there.
All right. Well, this has been our N of 1 small focus group. But hey, look, small sample size theater is a real thing. Thank you for adding that. And once again, I will say to people, we appreciate Nicholas's work. You're going to see on Worth Knowing more contributions from Ask a Young Person. I wish I still qualified. All right, Nicholas, I'll catch you right afterwards.
Nice job.
So let's get to your third plank here, because this is a really interesting one. You wrote, in terms of the media, the filter that people should apply when deciding what to pay for and what to consume. You wrote, look for transparency and passionate advocacy for the truth. If a news outlet has biases, and believe me, they do, Does it indicate those in any way? When I say biases, I really mean values. Left-leaning news outlets like the New Republic and Courier, which, by the way, sponsors your newsletter, are operating in defense of democracy while remaining faithful to the facts. ProPublica and The Guardian state clear missions to expose abuses of power, so it's only natural that they frequently write about MAGA corruption. That doesn't make them partisan. It makes them responsible and on brand. Fox, on the other hand, claims to offer journalism with diversity of thought while it regularly churns out lies. How does that connect to your ultimate verdict that you have decided to cancel paying for the Washington Post, but you are keeping the New York Times?
I think you have to go to motives, and you have to go to how much these news outlets show their motives, state their motives, and show them by how they act. If you go to ProPublica, for example, you're going to find all these great articles that have done hard investigations requiring big data searches and just digging, just investigative reporting that have proven all these different assertions that they make, and they show why they know it, and I mean they're just responsible. They're just doing what the real job of good journalism is, and so that's them, and you see them, and then you know that they're good, and they're also free, and that's another thing is that it is independent, nonprofit news. And when you go to corporate media, I'm all for paying for good news, and ProPublica will be happy to take your donation. That's how they stay in business, is people who have decided they're so good that they deserve their money to keep on going. But with commercial media, with this corporate media, they're trying to make money somehow from that news product. And does that mean that they're trying to win you over, or they're just trying to keep you? That's the thing. I mean, are they after your trust, or are they after some sort of exclusive with Trump in the White House? And what are they willing to give up to get that exclusive? And so I think you got to look for motives, and you got to look for so here you have, in my most recent newsletter, I denounced the Washington Post, which for most of the first Trump term was better than the New York Times, was maybe the best news source digging up dirt on Trump. Really good. But Jeff Bezos has decided that his other businesses, Amazon, Blue Horizon, stuff like that, is so important to him financially, and so threatened by an autocrat like Trump, that Bezos has got to make peace with him. That's why he wouldn't let his own editorial board endorse Kamala Harris when they wanted to. That's why Bezos gave $1 million to the Trump inauguration fund, and why he was sitting there in the row of oligarchs at the inauguration. That's why he paid $40 million for a bogus documentary on Melania Trump.
Oh gosh!
I mean, give me a break. Like, anyone really thinks they're going to get the truth out of some authorized biography of Melania Trump? She still hasn't explained how the hell she got into this country legally. So I mean, her Einstein, visa, that kind of crap. And by the way, Trump in August, I believe, of 2016, said that within 2 weeks she would stand for the press at a press conference and explain her entire immigration history. We're still waiting, and so they're just liars, and it requires media who are appalled by lies. This is the reason that the New York Times annoys me a lot, is that sometimes they play the news just for entertainment, oh, look at the sneaky political trick that the Republicans just pulled. Well, they ought to be appalled by that kind of trickery. They ought to, every time a Republican or a Democrat lies to their audience, they ought to be angry about it. They ought to confront people who are lying to their audience. Part of what their job is, as we talked about earlier, is to tell the truth, inform their audience, to inform the public. And when somebody is trying to use them to lie to the public, they shouldn't just say, well, that might help them in the next election. No, they should be so appalled by that they fight back and expose it. And I mean, I don't mean just like with a fact check 3 days later. I mean, in real time, they should say, no, that's not true. No, why are you lying to us now? That they should say things like that, and so a confrontational media that is an advocate for the truth is what's required. And that's why those are the kind of media that are worth paying for.
Two quick points. One is just pop up one more Navigator research piece. There's a consequence of all of this, which is it's dragged everyone into the same cesspool. There's that old saying, never wrestle with a pig in mud. You
Right.
get dirty, he has fun. And one of the consequences of all of this is that the impression, or there's another version of it, which is never get into an argument with an idiot because onlookers may not be able to tell the difference. And what the public is getting from all of this is noise and negativity. And you
Right.
see it in these qualitative interview responses here from young people. They are turned off by the whole thing. One of the conceits of Worth Knowing, one of the reasons that I wanted to do a Substack is that I wanted to make news interesting. I don't just want to talk about politics. I want to talk about politics adjacent topics. The one I'm trying to write about right now, I don't know. I might be pitching this to Newsweek. I haven't decided. They turned down my last idea, so I have to come up with something new. Is the camp conundrum. I want to talk about the middle class struggle to figure out what the hell to do with your kids in the summer. And, if you're relatively affluent and you have a 2-parent household, it's not that bad and it's still impossible. What about single parent households? What about middle class and working class people? This is a huge struggle, and it's something that our politics hasn't even begun to contemplate. My point is that I think in that graph, and I think in the point that the news has become depressing, demoralizing, and a turnoff for people, there is an answer. There's an answer for corporate media to get themselves out of the jail that they have sentenced themselves to, which is to fucking innovate. And, I'm not asking media. The part of the reason I did that screed at the beginning about the history of newspapers is that, yes, it's a news business, right? And so I'm not looking for media to suddenly stop being entertaining, to stop going where the public interest is in terms of, you want to hear about a celebrity scandal, you want to hear about whatever it is. I'm not suggesting that they need to go cold turkey on their source of meth. I'm saying leverage it, use it, be more creative, right? Like go where the interest is, where the people are, and find a way to make the news not so depressing,
Right.
not so much just such a stream of bullshit from one side that the Democrats feel like they have to respond in kind, and before you know it, everyone's been dragged into the same cesspool.
Yeah.
All right, that's my screed.
Right, but think about like Bernie Sanders and AOC. Do they come across as negative? I don't think so. I think they come across as aspirational. I think they come across as people who can see a better way and are smart and are talking about it. You don't have to agree with them on everything, but they're trying to find a better country. And I don't think they come across as, oh, woe is me. I think the real, if you want to talk about democratic policy and stuff or positioning, it's these Chuck Schumer types that the only alternative they've got is we're not Trump. That doesn't play at all. And so I think both the news media and the resistance would be well advised to be more positive and to be more aspirational and to take the, I still think you need to aggressively confront liars, cheaters, and thieves. But at the same time, you can also stand up for the country and, wave the flag and stand up for our values. I mean, you're totally right that there's a positive spin you can put on things.
Here's my takeaway, because I have to get both of us out of here. You to do the important work that you're doing on Stop the Presses and on your own live stream, which is excellent, by the way. And me, because I have to go pick up kids from camp as a middle-class dad. So two things. One, I am getting an enthusiastic thumbs up from the audience here on my idea of that's bullshit. So I'm going to keep workshopping this, people, because I kind of want to do this, even though I'm enjoying Worth Knowing. I'm enjoying everything else I'm doing. Sort of intrigued. And if I don't end up doing it, then I'm going to give permission to license it to someone else. Second of all, to the point of this show, I'm going to explicitly, shamelessly say, please do subscribe so that you can amplify the voice of Mark Jacob and the work he is doing on Stop the Presses, because we need to nudge. We need to nudge our benevolent corporate overlords who hold the strings over our news media, who are so important to the health of our democracy. We need to nudge them, innovate, get active, find us where we are, be aspirational, do everything that Mark Jacob just laid out. And please do subscribe to Worth Knowing. And if you have thought about paying for things that are worth knowing that you enjoy in your media diet, I would certainly appreciate the support. On that note, Mark, thanks so much for being with us. And to everyone out there, stay safe, be well. We will see you next week.